Hi, I'm Billy Stewart, Assistant Pastor here at Solid Rock Tabernacle, 1325 Rudy Road in Alma, Arkansas. On behalf of Senior Pastors Harold Lee and Debbie Gilmore and the entire congregation of Solid Rock Tabernacle, I would like to welcome you to the broadcast and extend this personal invitation to you to come be with us in one of our exciting spirit filled services. Our Sunday school begins at 9 a.m., morning worship is at 10 a.m., and Sunday evening worship is at 6 p.m. We also have an exciting Wednesday evening Bible study at 7 p.m., where we are taking a journey through the Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. I think you'll enjoy it. Join us, won't you? 1325 Rudy Road in Alma. We're church the way it should be, and we'll save a seat for you. Now, let's join our service already in progress. Remember him in his family as well. Last I heard, he is still in critical condition, but
Well, they're still saying critical, but
he's up
yeah, from
from critical to just to critical. Okay, yeah, all right, yeah. Let's remember them.
they're debating on whether to put a tray.
Yeah, a trachean. Okay, well, yeah, that was a terrible thing that happened, and then it's getting bad.
It is getting bad.
It's stuff in there was uh, officer involved shooting in Franklin County, which that's just basically unheard of, you know. So there's just a lot of stuff that's going on in those areas that, it's just getting worse and worse in the world now. And we just have to keep praying because, I don't know how much longer the Lord's going to just keep letting things happen. It's in Revelation, the elders under the throne were screaming, how long, Lord? How long before the martyrs were saying, how long before you avenge us? How long before are you going to let this keep going on? And he's not going to let it go on much longer. Okay? So time's getting short. All right, getting back to Numbers. Anybody remember? I know it's been a couple of weeks. And okay, yeah. So
Aaron was told to gather up the censers and then press them down because they were still holy objects.
uh-huh.
And basically,
They used them to cover the altar.
yeah.
Yeah, to cover the altar. Yeah. So now we're moving into we might chapter 17 is not all that long, and I don't want to get into chapter 18 and start a new chapter, because once you get into a new chapter and you get just a few verses into it, it gets kind of confusing going back and forth like that. So we're just going to do 17 tonight, but it's going to be, it might take up the whole class. I don't know. If it doesn't, we'll get done early. So anybody got a problem with that? I don't see anybody going, no, we better not get done early. It's just like preaching. I've never seen anybody say that when you get up there and say, I'm only going to keep you for a few minutes. Everybody say, no, you're not. You better preach longer than just a few minutes. Yeah, you better preach longer than a few minutes. I paid good money to get this. Yeah, gas prices are way too high to where you'd only, preach 5 or 10 minutes. No. All right, Numbers chapter 17. We're going to start at verse number 1 to 3. This is a real interesting chapter, too. I think you're really going to like this. 17 verses 1 to 3. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and take of every one of their fathers, and of all their to the house of their fathers 12 rods. Write thou every the rod of Levi, for one rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers. So the rod, at least in those times, was a symbol of authority. The one that had the rod was the one in charge, okay? And this was because shepherds would use the rod in order to guide and correct the sheep. Okay? That's what we need, Pastor. We need to start bringing rods in here. Steel ones, yeah. Steel rods. We'll make them look like they're wood, but you know, yeah. Pay attention. Yeah. But Moses, as a shepherd, always had a rod in his hand when he was tending the sheep. Because remember, Moses was a shepherd for a lot of years. And he always had a rod in his hand when he was tending the sheep. Okay? This is longer. The rod is taller than, you know, I mean, it's a big, you can use it as a walking stick, but it's, you know, it's a tall rod. It usually had a curve at the top of it, a hook that they could hook their, you know, the sheep and everything with. Okay? But this rod that Moses had was later come to be known as the rod of God. And it was a symbol of the authority that God had given to Moses. Okay? Now, this same rod that was held by Moses demonstrated his authority in several different actions. Okay? The rod in the hands of Moses, let's look at some of the things that it did. In the hands of Moses, the rod became a serpent and then turned back into a rod again. Okay? It also turned the waters of the Nile into blood. Right? It brought on the plague of frogs, of lice, and of hail, and locusts in Egypt. He raised it. If you remember, Moses raised that rod when he wanted the Red Sea to be parted. And he raised it in prayer over Israel in victorious battle. If you remember, when they were fighting some of the battles, he would raise his hands and hold the rod up. Okay? When his hands started to fall, his arms got tired and they started to come down, the enemy started to prevail. When he raised them back up, then Israel prevailed. And it got so bad that he had to have two people stand beside him and help him hold his arms up. He got to sit down on a rock and they stood there and held his arms up for him. So victory could prevail. All right? He used the rod to strike the rock that caused the water to come forth. All right? So the rod is also a picture of God's authority over man as well. Jesus, in his divine authority, was given the title of the rod in Isaiah 11:1 and in Micah 6:9. Jesus in those prophecies is called the rod. The rod was also an emblem of an apostle's authority in the early church in 1 Corinthians 4:21. There is a lot of denominations now, not just the Catholics, but there's like Episcopals and some of the other, even Lutherans and some of them, that the higher authority, the higher ranking, I guess you could say, ministers within the church, part of their symbol is carrying a rod. Okay? And it's got that shape. It looks like a shepherd's rod. And that's just a symbol of their authority in the church is all it was, just like the apostles had in 1 Corinthians 4:21. Okay? Now, after gathering all of these rods together, they inscribed each with the name of a tribe. They put the name of each one of the tribes on these rods. Right? And after inscribing Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. Now, by doing this, God would declare which tribe possessed the priestly authority. Because remember, this is right after Korah and his rebellion and the 250 people and all those people that are getting swallowed up. You know, with all of this, God would now choose who had priestly authority by using these rods. And by choosing one of the rods, as I said, this was after Korah's rebellion. And all of this happened because of what the Lord spoke to Moses. He said, get every one of them to gather these rods together. All right? Now, verses 4 and 5. And thou shalt lay them up in the congregation before the testimony where I will meet with you. And it shall come to pass that the man's rod whom I shall choose shall blossom, and I from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against you. So, not only would this be an obviously miraculous sign, the blossoming of dead wood spoke of fruitfulness. Because remember, these rods aren't living sticks of wood anymore. They've been used for a while, they've been held for a while, and they're not alive anymore. They're dead pieces of wood. And God's going to say, the one I choose, that's the one that I'm going to let that blossom. I'm going to make that blossom. I'm going to bring it back to life, basically. He says, I'm going to make it blossom. And this blossoming of dead wood spoke of fruitfulness. And fruitfulness, this miraculous fruitfulness, is present when God's authority, when godly authority and leadership are being practiced. Okay. So when this has happened, that's when godly fruitfulness will come about. Now look what he says. He says, I will make to cease from me the murmurings. What is murmuring? Yeah, you know, griping, complaining, and usually, you know, yes. Plotting in a way, yeah. Yeah, plotting is part of it. But murmuring is just sitting around, you know. Yeah, they always find something to complain about. When people are murmuring, they're standing around and they're murmuring. They don't say it real loud because they're afraid of who might hear them. And they're like, oh, that's so-and-so. He just, you know. I sure wish those pastors would do something in that church. Stuff like that. Murmuring. And God says, I'm going to put a cease to that murmuring. Now, this doesn't mean that after this, the children of Israel would never complain again. We've seen that doesn't happen. The children of Israel are pretty good about complaining. They may not be able to do much else, but they can sure complain. And here's two words. I love these two words. But God. But God, having demonstrated more than sufficient evidence to the murmurers, would no longer regard their murmuring. In other words, he's no longer going to listen to their murmuring. Instead, he's going to judge their murmuring. Murmurers, now, when you look at it, murmurers are rarely satisfied with evidence. You can bring forth evidence, and that will rarely satisfy them. Yeah, you know, they are rarely satisfied with that evidence or even the resolution of any one issue. One of the things that I'm thinking about that came to mind as I was doing this was the flat earthers. There are people that actually believe that the earth is flat. And they're stubborn about it. And they say, oh, no, that's fake. All the spacecraft that go up that you see and all that stuff, that's all fake. It's all propaganda. It's not real. But proof that the world is not flat. Because if the world were flat, the cats would have already pushed everything off. So we know that the world is not flat. But complainers are not usually issue motivated. though they might claim to be issue motivated, or they may even appear to be issue motivated. But more often than not, they are heart motivated. They're motivated by feelings, by emotions, things like that. That's what they're motivated by. Okay? They sometimes murmur because they have complaining and discontented heart. Usually people who murmur are people who are really good at complaining about everything. We all know some murmurers out there. Everybody know murmurers, complainers, people who will complain about everything. Doesn't matter. They wouldn't care if you hung them with a new rope. They're going to complain about it. Okay? People are going to complain about everything. And you say, oh, yeah, those people need to be in church. Well, the problem is a lot of those people are in church. A lot of those people are in church. Yeah. Do you know somebody, have you ever heard, or I'm sure we all know of someone, that every time you ask them how you're doing, they're going to give you a whole list of their ailments. What the doctor said the last time, and that doctor's stupid, he don't know what he's talking about. I don't care that he went to 8 years of medical school and residency and all this other stuff. He don't know what he's talking about. And that I got this wrong and this wrong and this wrong and this wrong and this. And it gets to the point to where you don't even want to talk to these people. When you see them coming, you will go the other way. Walking up to them and you see them and you suddenly remember, I've got something very important I need to do over here. I'm sorry, I got to run, because they're murmuring and complaining all the time about something. Huh? Yeah, they just complain. They're discontented. All right? And the complaining heart is demonstrated when people murmur about one issue after another issue after another issue. They're never satisfied. Never satisfied. Okay? So God was going to give them an unmistakable answer to this matter of contention. This matter of who has the priestly authority, God's going to put it to rest. He's going to say, here it is. This is it. This is final. Like, who wants to be a millionaire? Final answer. This is it. This is the final decision. Then he was going to rid himself of the complaints. He wasn't going to listen to them anymore. You can complain all you want, but I ain't going to listen to you. All right? All right, verses 6 and 7. And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, and every one of their princes gave him a rod apiece, for each prince one according to their father's house, even 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses laid up the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now, this can be a little confusing when you're reading it. All right? By reading this, how many rods were there? 12? 13? It says 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among them, their rods. So was it 12 or 13? Well, some believe there were a total of 12 rods, with the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, represented by one rod. All right? Huh?
Just gave extra information that one of the rods was Aaron.
Okay, well, but they put the colon in there, but remember, Hebrew doesn't have punctuation. So when they were doing this, there was no, the punctuation was added by the translators later. Okay? So some believe that there were just 12 rods, right? And that the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, were represented by one rod. But others believe that Aaron's rod was added to the 12 rods, which made 13 rods. Now, does it matter? No, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. But when you look at this, is why you have to be careful how you look at things, because it can be confusing sometimes. Okay? Moses and the tribes of Israel did just as God commanded in the previous message. Okay? Now, several commentators, I think Cole is one of them, actually believe the rods were placed in the Holy of Holies, in the most holy place, where the Ark of the Covenant was. Okay? If you remember in the tabernacle, you have the tabernacle, and then you have the gate. Outside the gate of the tabernacle and around the gate, the front of the gate of the tabernacle, that's where sacrifices were made. All right? Then they would take them into the tabernacle. In the middle of the courtyard of the tabernacle, that is where the burnt offerings were offered. That's where the altar. The tabernacle, as you got further into the tabernacle, you have the holy place, which is where the showbread and the lamp, all this was at. Then even further in, behind the veil, behind the curtain, was the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. That was a place that could only be entered once a year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And only then, there was only the high priest that was allowed to enter into this. Now, does anybody remember how thick the veil was? How much?
2 or 3 foot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was several, pretty close to, about, I think it was just a little over a foot is what it was. By the time they put it all together, and it weighed a lot. All right? So when we think, which is really, when you start thinking about it, which is really shows the power of God, that veil was torn in two when Jesus was crucified. It was ripped in two like it was nothing. Usually when we hear the veil was torn in two, we think, oh, well, it was like a curtain. Somebody ripped a curtain in half. No, this thing was, you ain't ripping this in half by yourself. Yeah, you couldn't cut it with a knife. You put horses on each end of that thing and pull it, and it ain't going to come apart. This thing was thick and it was heavy. And when it was torn in two, that's something else. All right? But, so, some commentators, like I say, believe that these rods were placed in the Holy of Holies, the most holy place out of all of them. That's where they were placed at. Okay? But it's possible that they may have just been placed outside the veil. There's some commentators that think, I think Allen is one of the commentators that actually believes that it was placed just outside the veil. Not actually in the Holy of Holies itself, but just outside the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. Now, the reason for this thinking on it, that it was placed outside the veil rather than in the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, because again, the Holy of Holies was only allowed to be entered once a year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then only the high priest could go in. So it wouldn't make sense for somebody to be able to walk in there, is what they're saying. Now, did God allow them to walk in and put it in the most holy place? It's very possible. The Bible doesn't specifically say. It just says it was placed in the tabernacle. Right? All right, verses 8 to 9. And it came to pass that on the morrow, Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded. and brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, and yielded almonds. And Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord unto all the children of Israel, and they looked and took every man his rod. So Moses goes in the next day to check. Again, another reason to believe that it was not in the Holy of Holies. Because Moses, although he was the leader and he was a prophet, was not the high priest. So he goes in wherever the rods are at. He goes in and sees them. And of all the rods that were laying there, whether there were 12 or 13, doesn't matter. The rods that were laying there, only one of them was bloomed. One of them had bloomed out. And that was Aaron's rod. And only Aaron's rod. Only his rod had sprouted. And it had not only sprouted, but it also brought forth buds. Okay? You know, when you see, especially this time of year when things are starting to bloom out, you'll see things start to turn green and sprout out. And then all of a sudden, boom, there'll be flowers on it. And we all start sneezing our heads off. And I love the smell of honeysuckle, but it kills me. It kills my sinus. It makes me sneeze so bad. And around hole number 9, there's a lot of honeysuckle. But anyway, okay. But you see it starts blooming out. It starts having flowers. It starts bringing out these buds. And not only had it brought forth buds, but it produced blossoms as well. The flowers had come out. And not only had it produced blossoms, it had also yielded almonds. So in one night, it had done all this stuff. And not only had it yielded almonds, it yielded ripe almonds. So in one night, this dead rod that was there sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced almonds, and those almonds ripened in one night. Now, that's miraculous. Okay? Now, this was a place where a relatively small miracle would have been convincing. Just a small miracle. If it had just had a little green sprout on it, that would have been enough. Just for a little green sprout to come out on that. That would have been miracle enough. Okay? And that would have or should have been enough for them to be convinced. Oh, wow, that was a dead rod, and now it's starting to sprout. Okay? But God gave, as in the words of Act 1 and 3, many infallible proofs. Not only did he give just one little sprout, he gave all of this. So there was no doubt whatsoever about it. Okay? And he did this to demonstrate his approval of Aaron's leadership. God, when you look at it, God gives us more than enough evidence. Okay? There is evidence out there. The Bible tells us the skies declare the glory of God, or the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Okay? The miracles are there. We can see the miracles. The problem is not that the miracles aren't there. The problem is a lack of willingness to see what he has made clearly. Okay? That's where the problem comes in. If we don't see the miracles, then we just see them as things that are happening. It's real easy to look into the night sky and see all the stars and everything like that and think, yeah, okay, that could all come by accident, you know. But when you get out and you really see the stars, I mean really see the stars, You go out away from the city where there is no lights, where there is nothing, in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the desert, whatever it is, and you look up at a clear night sky, you will see stars that, I mean, in the city, you look up and you see some stars up there and you go, oh, that's cool, there's some stars. But when you get out there in that, there's just so many stars. The sky is just like almost completely covered with just these stars. Yeah, go to West Fork. Go somewhere and look at it. Get up on top of Mount Magazine at night and look at that and look at the stars. I mean, it's awe-inspiring. And to think all of that happened by accident? Doesn't make any sense. There ain't no way that could have happened by accident. Okay? For everything to have happened and everything to fall in place as it fell in place, it's not an accident. There's no way it's an accident. There was a divine plan that was put into place. And if there is a plan, there is a planner. If you're going to have a plan, you got to have a planner. Plans don't develop themselves. Okay? Yes.
Oh man, this is funny kind of. I usually when I make a garden at home, I dig it by hand, and I always like doing that, but my health's going down. So I use my head, and I got me some bags of soil, and I put them right there, and then I tore them up, and that's how I made my garden. You know, when we do stuff for the Lord, you got to use your head, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did in my garden. You ought to see it. I got squash coming on, everything, tomatoes. You know, when God does something, He don't play around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Stewart, he does exactly what He says He'll do when we ask Him.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Okay? There is nothing remarkable about a piece of wood with buds, blossom, or fruit on it. But a piece of dead wood with all these things appearing in one night after sitting in a tent, yeah, that's pretty remarkable. There's no way you can doubt that. Okay? Now, God's choice of Aaron's rod did not mean that Aaron was the most spiritual man in the nations. We tend to want to think that Aaron was the most spiritual one. Doesn't necessarily mean that. Okay? Huh? He was a leader. Well, he was the high priest, but yeah, he was a leader. But when you look at it, God's chosen leaders will have a godly character. That's one of the things about God's chosen leaders. They're going to have this godly character. It's according to the principle of 1 Timothy 3, 1:13, and also Titus 1, 5-9. But this wasn't a contest to see who was the most spiritual. Okay? It also did mean that Aaron had not and would not sin or fail significantly. Okay? God's chosen leaders may fail. God's chosen leaders may sin, but they must set things right when they do. See? Even God's chosen leaders are going to fail, and they're going to sin. There's no doubt about it. Okay? We can't, and that's, I think that was a problem that we get sometimes when we look at pastors and at ministers and things, and we kind of put them up here and say, they're supposed to be more, they're supposed to be more perfect than we are. They're supposed to be, no. Okay? They're going to fail. They're going to sin. The thing is, you have to make it right. When you do fail and you do sin, then you have to make it right. You have to get right with God. You have to make it right with God. Okay? The clear choice of Aaron meant that he was God's chosen priest. That meant that God chose him. I chose Aaron. God's saying, I chose Aaron to do this. That's my decision. And the rest of the nation needs to recognize that. Not go around like they did with Korah and all of those and say, oh, well, we want to have our own thing going on. No. God said, this is who I chose. Now accept it. Now shut up about it and just take it. Eh?
Brother, when you are a leader and you got to make choices, and everybody don't always like the choices,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have to follow the leading of the Lord. And like you said, all of the sin that comes before the glory of God every day, I have to deal with myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't like the way I act, so I have to say, Lord, I need your help. I'm weak, and when the Bible says, when I'm weak, I'm strong.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like today, I was so sick today, and the devil fought me. I couldn't even keep nothing down to now. But you know what? I ain't gonna let him stop me.
Yeah.
He wants to stop us. He don't want us, Brother Stewart, to get the power of God going in our life. He wants you just to weaken and try to kick you around.
Yeah.
He ain't kicking us around.
That's right. That's right.
How I feel today. He ain't gonna kick us around. I'm sorry.
He ain't go. No, that's fine. He ain't gonna kick us around on it. I know how some people read the word, repent and be Baptist. For all have sinned and fallen short in the assemblies of God, but that's not what the word says, okay? But we do need to repent, and all of us need to, when we sin, we need to make it right. But ministers, leaders, even more so, okay? Aaron's rod was chosen, and it was chosen to bear fruit. Those who God chooses should have evident fruit as a mark of their election. Okay? Aaron's rod had both fruit, the almond, and the promise of future fruit as well. Okay? Now, this was a dramatic scene. Okay? Each murmurer from each of the tribes had to come and pick up their rod the next day. It wasn't like Moses said, oh, yep, Aaron's rod is doing it. No, you don't get to see all they want. No, everybody had to come and pick up their rod the next day. And they clearly saw that their rod had not budded or borne fruit. The difference between Aaron's rod and the others could only be attributed to God and to God alone. Yeah. Yeah. When you think, oh, I'm just as good as he is, and lay it down, and God says, no, I'm not choosing you, I'm choosing him. Okay? And they each one had to go face that. Okay? And they saw this, and it was a miracle that only God could do. Now, this should have made Aaron even humbler. Okay? Should have made Aaron even humbler than he was. What God did to affirm the choice of Aaron was something that had nothing to do with Aaron himself. Okay? Bearing fruit, when we bear fruit, it should give us both a sense of authority and humility. Okay? Leaders have to not only have that authority and to put that out, and they have to bear that fruit, but they have to be humble as well. Right? It can't be that you should all follow me because you should all follow me.
If you puff up, you can't hear nothing.
Yeah, if you puff up, you can't hear nothing.
It's taking you, Brother Stewart, to a place you don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
If I give to God and I spend my time with God, it's going to show up.
That's right.
But when it's me, it ain't me. It's got to be Jesus. And if it ain't him and it ain't the Holy Ghost, I don't. But
Yep, that's right. That's right. All right, verses number 10 and 11. The Lord said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, to be kept for a token against the rebels. And thou shalt quite take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. And Moses did so, and the Lord as the Lord commanded him, so did he. So the rod of Aaron was basically kind of kept as a museum piece. I can talk one of these days. And this was to remind the children of Israel that God had a chosen priesthood. He had chosen who he wanted in the priesthood, and nothing was going to change that. It's in the Ark of the Covenant. We just don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. All right? Aaron's priesthood would always be Aaron's priesthood. Okay? The unfruitful rods, the ones that didn't bear any fruit, that didn't bud out or anything, they were given back to their owners. But the fruitful rod, that was kept before the Lord. Okay? And again, Aaron's rod was to be kept in the Ark of the Covenant as another example of Israel's failure and rebellion. When God looked down from heaven into the ark, what he sees in that ark are the emblems of Israel's sin. Okay? What was in the ark? Does anybody know what was in the ark? Okay. What else? Aaron's rod, okay. Anything else? Manna, yes, manna. Okay. So when God looks down, he sees the emblems of Israel's sin. He sees the tablets of the law that they broke. Okay. He sees the manna that they complained about. Remember, God fed them manna all this time. And what did they do? They complained about it. Well, you're giving us manna, you're feeding us, but you don't give us no meat. Yeah. Never happy, never satisfied. Give them something and want more. Okay? And boy, did God give them more, if y'all remember correctly. The more they complained about it, yeah. And then they saw Aaron's rod, which was an answer to their rebellion. Now, if you remember, the covering blood of sacrifice was applied to the lid covering of the ark that one time of the year on Yom Kippur. Okay? They would go in that year, which was the beginning of the year, the Day of Atonement. They would go in and they would pour the blood over the reminders of Israel's sin. So God saw the blood covering their sin. And because of that, an atonement was made. Okay? Now, God also noted that their murmuring and their complaining against Aaron was actually murmuring and complaining against God himself. That's what they were doing. When they complained about Aaron and his priesthood, they were actually complaining about God himself, because God's the one that appointed Aaron. So they were complaining about God. At the same time, there was not another direct rebellion that came about against Aaron's authority as the high priest of Israel after this. Okay? Yes.
It's just like today, how we elect presidents, and then once people, they elect the president, and they then see all the things that the president is doing and start complaining about it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's always,
They don't realize that they're the ones who voted for it.
yeah. Well, most of them that were complaining are not the ones that voted for him. But it's, you know, still, you've always going to have people that are going to complain and gripe and bellyache and moan and, I could do better. It's always easy to be an armchair quarterback. Hey, I'm sure most everybody knows what an armchair quarterback is, right? Monday morning quarterback, you're the one that, oh, well, if I was quarterback, I would have done this and I would have done that. If I was a coach, I would have done this and I would have done that. You know what? You're not, okay? Yeah. If you could do it, you would be doing it. You're not doing it. All right? All right, verses 12 and 13. We're winding it up here. And the children of Israel spake unto Moses, saying, Behold, we die, we perish, we all perish. Whosoever cometh anything near unto the tabernacle of the Lord shall die, shall we be consumed with dying. Okay? This basically shows that the children of Israel were convinced of what their sin was. They now clearly saw that what they did was wrong. Okay? They were wrong to contest the priestly leadership and the priestly authority of Aaron. Now, if you remember, much of chapter 16, when we were going through that, was talking about the rebellion of Korah and was done during that rebellion of Korah. But this gave the Israelites who resisted the leadership of Aaron a reason to be afraid. Because look what happened to Korah and his people and the 250 leaders that were following him, or elders that had followed him. Look what happened to all these people. Okay? So now the children of Israel see what God's decision is. God wants Aaron. We rebelled against that. Oops. I see what he did to those other people. Is he going to do that to us now? Okay. Remember, the leaders were judged and destroyed. The 250 followers among the leading men of Israel were judged and destroyed. The censers, which we talked about earlier, from the 250 that were there, were flattened and used to cover the altar. A plague was used to judge and destroy 14,700 of those who sympathized with Korah and his followers. Now, considering the miraculous confirmation of Aaron's priesthood, the people feared that they were going to be the next ones who would be judged and then destroyed. Okay? And when you think about it, that wasn't an unreasonable fear. Right? This kind of feverish fear doesn't necessarily mean that their hearts were changed. Think about that. Eh? Just because somebody has a fear of something doesn't mean that their hearts have been changed. Consider somebody who goes out and robs a bank and they get caught and they're facing years in prison. Are they sorry that they robbed the bank? No, they're sorry they got caught, is what the deal is. Right? Doesn't mean that their hearts have been changed because they got caught. It just means that they're afraid because they got caught and now they have to face the consequences of that. Right? So the children of Israel, they knew what they were convinced of what their sin was. They saw what their sin was. They saw all of this, and yet they were still afraid that God would destroy them, judge them, and destroy them. And because of that, they were afraid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their hearts were changed. And as we'll see as we go along, this will not be the last account of complaining and murmuring Israel. They're still going to complain and murmur later on. Eh? Yeah. Yep, this time they'll be judged. Now, this shows that what this shows is the same thing that it shows us. And it's the same thing that shows about us. That shows that dramatic events doesn't take away our complaining and rebelliousness. Right? The heart is what has to be changed. Not fear going into it, the heart has to be changed in order for a true transition and a true repentance and a true changing to take effect. You have to change your heart. Okay? And we're going to leave it there because that ends chapter 17.
Thank you for joining us today. We pray you were blessed by the broadcast. If you have a prayer request or questions about Solid Rock Tabernacle, please visit our website at www.solidrocktabernacle.org. That's www.solidrocktabernacle.org. On behalf of the pastors and congregation here at Solid Rock Tabernacle, we pray you have a blessed week, and we invite you to join us in person or on one of our future broadcasts.